So welcome, happy Friday. Thank you for joining us today. We're joined by Sebastian Mejia. I'm Bayley, Mizelle, the director of the Photographic Arts Council Los Angeles. We'll be joined by Sebastian for an artist talk and presentation, followed by an open Q&A. Thank you for joining us today, Sebastian. I know that you're in Chile, so it's a little late there in the evening. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Bayley. I'm happy to be here. Very happy.
Right. Just before we get started, I'd like to send a note of gratitude to our board of directors, membership, and sponsors. Thank you for your ongoing support and commitment to PAC LA's growth, for our programming and building our community, making events like today and future ones possible for the LA arts community and our membership. Another big thank you to the California Arts Council for selecting PAC LA as a grantee of their Arts and Cultural Organizations General Operating Relief Grant. We're so thrilled to be supported by our state's arts funding. We look forward to sharing more of those details and our plans for the funds with you in the coming days. So that was some big announcement that we just had. Some of you might have seen it in our member newsletter today, but I just wanted to thank the state for that grant today.
Congratulations. That was today?
We actually got the notice about a week ago, but we are announcing it today as they requested. So yes, thank you. Just a quick run of show. For the first 40 to 45 minutes, Sebastian will present on his talk. And then following that, we will have a conversation and open Q&A that I will return and moderate. Sebastian has requested that at any point during his presentation, if you have any questions or thoughts for him, feel free to pose them during the presentation. We'll go ahead and pause to engage your question. Sebastian will have eyes on the chat as well as I, and we will go from there. Just a quick intro. I'll read Sebastian's bio, and then I'll include some links in the chat for you to engage after the talk, and then we'll get started. Sebastian Mejia is a photographer and teacher based in Santiago de Chile. Mejia's photographic work focuses on primitive life that commonly goes unnoticed in the modern metropolis. His work has been showcased in numerous exhibitions in Chile and abroad, including Nous at the Fondation Cartier in Paris, Urban Impulses at the Photographers Gallery in London, and Quasi Oasis at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santiago. Sebastian received his bachelor's degree in photography from the School of Visual Arts in New York, and is currently studying an MFA at Universidad Finisterra in Santiago de Chile. Again, at any point during the presentation, if you have questions and comments for us, please add them in the chat in the Q&A box, and we will get to them as we can. I will be running the presentation, so please have patience for my responses, but Sebastian should be able to look over those chat questions too and engage them as he goes through.
I will try, yes.
Okay, perfect. So I will pass it to you now, Sebastian, to kind of give an intro to everyone, and I'll pull up your presentation and I'll return towards the end to moderate.
Great. Thank you. Just want to say that it's such an honor to be here. Thank you, Paula Lee, for the invitation. And it's so great to find out of initiatives like this, like PAC LA. Because of this, I have been seeing the videos of previous events, artist talks, and things like that. And it's so interesting, and just honored to be here.
Thank you.
A little bit about myself. I was born in Peru, in Lima. I raised in Colombia, in Bogota, and then I finished. I moved to Santiago, where I finished my school and started studying photography. After that, I had the opportunity to study more at length in New York in the School of Visual Arts. And after that, I moved back to Chile. So when people ask me, where are you from? It's a kind of complicated question because it's from many places. But for the past 10 years and more, I've been living in Santiago, and mostly my work has been based here. I work as a fine art photographer. I work as a teacher as well in the university, and as a commercial photographer. So what I will show you today is a presentation I prepared called Dialogues, because I want to use the format as a kind of conversation of my work with the history of photography. So I will show you some of my roots as a photographer, work that has been published in book form, and also what I'm working on now that I've showed very little. So I'm excited to share with you. And as Bayley said before, please feel free to ask, interrupt. For me, it's better because I feel like, sometimes talking to a screen is a bit odd. So let's get started here. Bayley, could you go to the first slide, please? Okay, so this is, I chose this image to start because it shows my background as a photographer. I started studying photography here in Santiago and the university, and most of my teachers were photojournalists. So I come from this tradition of photojournalism, street photography, documentary that is more traditional, and I think I'm still very related to that tradition. And what I want to show you is like my journey from here to my current projects. So what I will be doing is alternating some of my work with photographers that I admire and just briefly saying what it is about their work that has inspired me. Can we go to the next slide, please? Sergio Larraín is a famous documentary photographer from Chile who photographed in Valparaíso, a city in the port here close to Santiago, and who has been a big influence from my street photography days to now, because he manages to take that the tradition of street photography and also mix it with a more enigmatic, like a transcendental touch. Can we go to the next, please? And this is the type of images that I was doing. This is early 2000s, and I was out, with my 35 millimeter camera, like hunting for these types of instances. Can we go to the next, please? Another major influence in my work has been Manuel Álvarez Bravo. I would say Sergio Larraín and Manuel Álvarez Bravo, I chose to mention first because, they are rooted in the Latin American, tradition. And what I want to share of these two works, what I want to communicate is their ability to have managed this documentary language, but with, lyrical touch, with a characteristic poetic touch. Next, please. And from school in Chile, I moved to New York to study in the School of Visual Arts. And it is in New York where I discovered photography's relation to contemporary art. So I'm talking about artists using camera, land art, conceptual art, all of these things that have to do with minimalism. And I would say those two influences, on the one hand, street photography, and on the other hand, contemporary art and artists using cameras, artists using photography, are the two main forces that drive my work. On one hand, the documentary part would be the roots, or like what keeps me grounded. And on the other hand, on the fine art side, or the more conceptual side, would be more to give it a contemporary outlook. Go to the next, please. So my focus shifted to more still things, right? More details, things that happen in the ground, things that grow. Can we go to the next, please? Like this type of things. But I still consider myself a street photography, and I still think it's very important to walk the city and to search the city. And all of my projects that I will show here, you will see that are very related, and they have to do with this same scenery that is in the urban environment, and have also the same process, that it's not it's not preconceived ideas of the work, but it's going out and searching for it. And I think that also has to do with very much with street photography as well. Next. I also included a few images from my first trip to California, because I am a big fan of California. I have to admit, when I first went there, I was really amazed. I think there are many parallels with California and Chile. They are topography-wise are similar. I think Santiago and LA have similar things also. They are cities that are very spread out, very car-oriented, and these I attached a few images from my first trip to San Francisco, where I was amazed by the relation to nature as well. LA and San Francisco, both. Can we go to the next? And what caught my eye, that has also been a recurrent theme in my work, was this relationship of inhabiting the land and driving nature away and inhabiting it, and then reincorporating nature through our gardens and through our yards and through our parks. And this is something that keeps popping up. Next. These types of things. I keep going back to trees, to plants, that are things that are mostly still, but at the same time, it's observing how a city is changing constantly, just only that at a much slower slower pace, than the decisive moment of street photography. And next. So what I will show you now has to do with this publication right here that is called Panorama. And I will show you 3 books. They're all self-published. And this is the more formal book. And it has 2 series. One that's mainly about the urban palm trees of Santiago. That's called Quasi Oasis. And another one that's called Expedition, that has to do with how I got there, with how I got to singling out palm trees as a specific species. Next. So you have to start with Fox Talbot, I think. Nowadays, where photography is everywhere, and so much, technical options and discourse options, I believe that in the 19th century photography and early photography is like also a way of saying, like, as I said before, like grounding. No, it's like it's more like solid ground. I keep going back to that as a reference. And what I admire about Fox Talbot is this spirit of discovery that's in his work. Can we go to the next? So my goal is to apply that spirit to the contemporary South American landscape. It's also, Fox Talbot in his writings just stated some things that are still so valuable, like how photography has no hierarchy in the way it sees, and it describes everything with the same detail. And another thing is how photography has that ability to single out something and for further observation. Next, please. So I will be showing some of these palm trees. That is a large series of almost 20 photographs, just by little portions. This is a photograph in Santiago that's of a Peruvian restaurant. So I don't know if you can see in the screen, but the top layer of the restaurant is a representation of a pre-Hispanic design of a type of ruin, and then there are and then there's these rock designs. And what I'm interested as well with these works is the layers of time that are manifested. Just by observing one thing, all of these tiny details start to come into the frame and to communicate as well. Next. Another 19th century photographer that I admire is Francis Frith. And yes, I mean, I consider myself a landscape photographer, urban landscape, and the scenes that I look for aren't this magnificent, but there is something of the sense of awe and this romantic spirit also that Francis Frith communicates that I admire. And next. And I try to apply to the areas that surround Santiago. Now, if you look closely, in the center of the image, there is a couple that is sitting. I did a kind of zoom in. Go to the next. Hope you can see it a little better there. And then one more, please. Next. There they are. So they saw me. This is with a large format camera. They saw me from afar. I had my camera and they posed, and we never talked. I just took the picture and from afar just waved goodbye. And it was an interesting experience. It's important in this case, to have the human figure in the frame, to give it a scale, and also as a form of introduction to the work, to what we're going to see is our relation to the land. Next. Another photographer that has been a big influence is Edward S. Curtis, which is known for this type of work. But what I really enjoy has to do more with his architectural photography. Next. This type of work that has a more anthropological view. And what I do is I try to apply that to my surroundings. Go to the next, please. And look for these types of observations that have to do with dwellings and the way we dwell, the way we inhabit the land. And also, if we stop and analyze it, it has to do with our relation to modernism, and specifically in South America, how that is interpreted and mixed with a lot of other local traditions. Next. Next, please. This is another photograph by Edward S. Curtis. And, you know, these types of relations that I'm making now, I don't think of when I'm out shooting, but it's just that when I see so much photography, so much history of photography, so much history of photography books, I start to make these connections. Can we go to the next? And things like this, that is just a street scene in Santiago, start to relate to the previous photograph that was, how do you say, a funerary ritual, a structure. And it has to do with how photography, you know, documents sculpture, how it can transform it as well, and also the creation of documents. Next, please. Another big influence has been Carlton Watkins. That also has to do with this romantic view of the landscape, this grandeur of nature. But again, my goal is to try and take that spirit and try to apply it to contemporary context. Next. So these scenes of these magnificent trees, in the center here is a person. I don't know if you can get to see it. Next. And try to apply it to downtown Santiago, places that have been transformed into temporary shopping centers, and that still have these trees that are reminders of the previous landscape, right? That inhabited the city as well. This photograph is, I think, how the series of palm trees started, with this type of observation that had to do with verticality. Well, the palm tree is such a straight vertical line that after this, I started looking for variations of that line and looking for different species of palm trees and different contexts. And I shot many, many palm trees in the city. Next. This is another Carlton Watkins that I like very much because this is 19th century, and we can see the seeds, of this conflict going on, of the way we are relating to the land, right? And the way we are moving across the land, and there's still this relationship. Next. So I try to apply that to one of the most typical streets here in Santiago, and just looking for the trees. The rest of the information that comes up is very interesting. It has to do with that building in the background and showing how the city is densifying very, very quickly. People there as a sense of scale, car dealership next to it. Things that this was around 8 years ago that have already changed a lot. Next. Marc Ferrez is a photographer that worked in the 19th century in Brazil, showing the roots of the palm trees. Next. And these images make me think of what if it might have been like to see these images. First of all, like the photographic description of these faraway places. And, it has a lot to do with how the ideas of the exotic landscape came about. Next. And I try to apply that to the current Caribbean landscape, where, it's been filled with tourism, and landscape is more a place of extraction and industry for I mean, in one side it's tourism industry, and also all of these ships that you see here are all coal. There's a coal mine nearby, so they are just transporting coal. And what we see here is, again, the presence of man in relation to the landscape. And there's two sunbathers right here that got the first rays of light of the morning. And these two shadows are two big buildings, and I'm shooting from one of the buildings, from like the 10th floor. Next. Another photographer that has been a big influence is Martin Chambi, Peruvian photographer who worked in Cusco at the beginning of the 20th century. This is a self-portrait, And this is the ruins of Machu Picchu in the back. Next. But I'm very interested in these types of photographs, of details, of constructions. And this is a famous rock, right? Oh, that has many angles. Next. And I try to apply that to my current neighborhood and photographing same type of timeless material, but this time in relation to a car that can date the photograph. Next. At J, of course, has to be present as well. His way of photographing the changing city, and in a way that can give importance to the details. Next. So what I'm photographing here is a modernist project that has started to been what is the word that's that they're starting to build extensions for it with different architectural styles, and that has to do with also security reasons, and it's just how I said before with one of the palm trees, the layers. Yes, like a collage, like an architectural collage. Next. Karl Blossfeldt, another classic and another big influence. Next. And also the capacity of photography to transform, to photograph something and convert it to 2 dimensions, but at the same time to highlight certain sculptural qualities in the photograph, and to isolate as well for further observation. Next. So winter Santiago skies were perfect for that. I don't have the ability to use a backdrop for these specimens, so I use that soft light to isolate it and to get as much detail as possible. Use a large format to get that descriptive language. And since they are still, then I can use the camera on a tripod and get the most out of it. The angles aren't very fancy. They are just mostly, centered, direct, and trying to be as most descriptive as possible. Next. But at first it may seem easy, to center everything, but it's this photograph, for example, I had to stand with the camera on a tripod right in between 2 streets in a very narrow space. That's not even a sidewalk. I don't know what it's called, but I had to order also all of that information And in that sense, that's also very much, my objective as a photographer and the topic of my work. It has to do with observing the physical world and the urban environment and trying to compose it within the frame, in a lyrical manner. Next.
Sebastian, I actually wanted to ask you a question about that.
Yes.
Talking about composing the frame in a lyrical manner. I mean, your previous image with the car and the rock, I wanted to see if you can talk a little bit more about, markers or elements that are in the compositions or frames that are permanent versus temporary or transient ones, and how you kind of make those decisions.
Yes, I think it has to do also with the documentary aspect of photography and respecting a certain sense of time and
Right.
place in a photograph, and also leaving it to the concentrating all of my decisions to the power of observation, right?
Right.
In that sense, they're still very much, straight photographs.
Right. Thank you for engaging that. For the next slide for you.
This is a photograph. If you can see to the right of the photograph, it's tied to a cable because it's falling, and that cable is tied to a very big rock. So it's a great scene. And in the background, that building is very iconic in Santiago because it's the one skyscraper, and it's another way to date it, right? To see it was still being finished. And of course, it's also a way to comment on things. Next. Another photographer I admire very much is Harry Callahan. And in this photograph, you can see it's just his way of making a photograph that borders on nothingness and doing it so elegantly. Go to the next. This is not a very famous Harry Callahan photograph, but it caught my eye because it's in Cusco, Peru. And I just thought it was great, to travel so far and in a place where there are so much photogenic material, and be amazed just by this ray of light that's hitting an eucalyptus. Next. So, yeah, I want to try and rescue that kind of magical aspect of photography as well. And this is a photograph of a lamp just at the right moment where it's not night yet, but the lights are already starting to turn on. So it has a lot to do with luck, being there at the right time, and the light just kind of like magically disappearing, the light bulb. Next. Ed Ruscha, big California photographer and big influence as well. And this is where we start to get into the camera in artist hands. And it starts to get very interesting as well. Next. Ed Ruscha just shooting gas stations, not minding the typical mistakes done by an amateur photography, not even not minding, trying to incorporate them. And that's, I think, what's so great about this work, that it came at a point where I think photographers were taking themselves way too seriously. And it came to kind of to refresh everything, you know, for a photographer to see this work. I think it's important. I mean, photographers must have hated this at the time, but for me, it was like, wow, it opened up a world of possibility. Next. It has to do with that of photographing in the street, but not focusing on the action, but more on what happens in the background. And there is so much complexity also in the backgrounds and things that often go unnoticed because the action or the people are what tends to capture all the attention. Next. This is a palm tree that is right by a very big shopping mall. And if you notice, right below the lamp post are people sleeping there. So initially, I go to photograph the palm tree because it has to do with, okay, I'm gonna go and look for this. But all of these things, as I said before, start coming into this additional information, starts coming into the frame and starts to, I think, make the photograph so much more rich. And in the sense that it talks about the time and place, and so much more complex. Next, please.
Sebastian, it also makes me think about the use of landscape architecture, right? And how when those things are being constructed, you're thinking of the social use of the space, right? Or also something you had said earlier about how we kind of inhabit based off of our relation to an object or nature. So it's almost like this tree is sheltering, or it's become this safe space. So I really personally like this composition for those elements.
Yes, that idea of shelter is so interesting because it's such a primitive way of looking at trees, you know, and I think that is ingrained into our DNA. It has to do with our relationship to nature as a way, as a space of shelter, as a place where we can get fruits and things like that, you know. So that's why I talk about my work in relation to like these primitive instances that happen like unconsciously in the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Latin America has a lot of that going on. That's why I love photographing here. Next. Robert Smithson, using the camera for just registering these actions in the land. And again, it's just a very just direct way of photographing, not fancy. No, it's just like utilitarian. It's just like, let's document this in a very straightforward way.
Right, and his use of the happening as well, right? The moment of the moment, and then the happening of the moment, and then the after.
Exactly. And so I take that and just it inevitably feeds the way I look at the world when I walk. We'll go to the next, please. And this is another series that is not in this book, but I wanted to include it because it's important. And it's these stones that were moved, and it's a play of scale because it was these very large rocks that were moved by a bulldozer or a tractor and left these traces. Go to the next. So the format talks about the history of photography, the brownie circle, but also a history of photography and search for scientific imagery as well. That has to do with the next slide. I like this. So it talks about the telescope or a microscope. In the end, it's something that to examine. Next. And what these rocks do is more like pose questions. Next, I think I included one more rock. Yeah. And next. New topographics had to be included because they have been a big influence. Next. Robert Adams, especially, because I like, I think it was in the New West text about Robert Adams, where John Sarkovsky wrote that a landscape can be inhabited and beautiful at the same time. We were taught that the landscape was away from the city, and it's works like this that try to teach us, that they are both, that this is landscape as well, that this has to do with nature very much as well. Next. So that's something that I admire very much about Robert Adams, but also in his insistence, of working the same theme for years and years. Next. Next. The Beshers, of course, another big influence. I chose this photograph in particular. If I'm not wrong, it's the cover of the anonymous sculpture, the first book they published. And it's a big influence in terms of typological work, but and also in the insistence, in this persistence in the same subject and the same type of strategies, but try to apply those strategies to the current South American landscape. Next, please. So it's interesting what happens here with the series and how they start to not only show their differences, but also come to life in a way. Next. I have visited this palm tree recently, and it has no more leaves left. It's just one big stump, and it has like this totemic quality to it. Next. This is the first show I did of the palm trees, and I wanted to print them big and to engage the viewer as a one-to-one relationship, almost like life-size to body, to encounter them kind of like as characters. That's something that happens with a typological display. Next. This space is no longer a parking lot. Now it's part of the new subway system that was constructed there. Next. And see, even though there are no people here, there is a stop sign that can give you a sense of scale. Next. And this is the cover of the image, where I think influences like Robert Adams and Ed Ruscha can like merge together to create this type of image. So I'm gonna briefly show you just a couple of book projects that I did after this book panorama. Can we go to the next, please? And this was right after I finished the book, and I was like tired of typology, tired of the large format camera, tired of black and white. And it's more of an exploration of Santiago's color palette. Santiago is a city that is very polluted. So it has very particular colors. Right? Everything's like covered by soot, and the sun comes in through a filter of smog. Can I go to the next? Oh, there is a question.
Yeah, just here in the Q&A if we want to pause and look at that. I'm unable to view it while sharing screen.
Oh no, I can't see it either.
Okay, we'll have to get back to the Q&A question at the end of
Okay.
the conversation. So apologies who has posted it.
Sorry, yeah. I can't see it either.
Okay. Sorry, continue.
Can we go to the next? And this is the cover of that project. It's called Syllabario, like as it comes from the syllabary. And it has to do with trying to look for my language in these urban fragments. Next. And I'm just going to show you a couple of spreads and a couple of details. Next. So my projects, can be seen as one big project. This has to do with the photograph of Edward S. Curtis that I showed earlier. That was this funerary structure. that was then echoed in black and white modernist building that I photographed. And it's just like things that start to reappear. Next. But the book form is very important because editing is a big part of the process, and can take a lot of photographs, and then they come together in this format in which rhythm is very important. So it has like this musicality to it. Next. And palm trees inevitably started to pop up back again, even though I tried to avoid them. I'm going to show 3 more slides and then we can close. Next. So I wanted to show you this, that is while I was trying to avoid the palm trees and trying to do different work, inevitably I ended up in the same places. So I was there, and so I photographed the palm trees. This was about 3 or 4 years later. Initially black and white, and then after was the color one. Next. To show how either sometimes the places have been changing, other times the palm trees have been growing. This is a palm tree. The first palm tree was below in the small black and white image. And it was a palm tree that was going to grow and was going to start hitting the ceiling. So I was curious. And so I returned 3 years later, and I had adapted the architecture and so that palm tree could stick out its head, and then the rest of the body is below. And one more. Oh, and this is on the left. It was the palm tree where you can see just the trunk that I told you was what started the series of palm trees. And then to the right is what you can't see. I have to go to a building, an office building, and ask if I could take a photograph from the window. So that's the rest of the palm tree. And what we can do is just leave it here for now, as it's been an hour already.
Okay. Hi, I'm back.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Nicely paced out too, and I loved all the history that you included as far as your influencers. So I'm going to hop into the Q&A really quickly, and then I have maybe one more question to engage with you, and then we'll leave it open for things.
Of course.
So this is from R. Freeman. For subjects that are still and apparently frozen in time, are you installing an implied sense of growth and movement?
Yes, I think photography is about time and space, and in this case, growth is the shift that is going on. There is a change. The thing is that the pace is so slow, but you can see things, the change in the last few images that I showed, that it has to do with years of revisiting places and seeing how the growth has happened or affected.
Also curious to see when things are constructed to kind of foresee that or to circumvent that change over time, right? And even when you see nature prevail or the structure actually kind of win that battle. That's why I love when you use the term conflict when talking about the architecture versus the species that are been inhabiting the space previously. Thank you, Sebastian. Okay, So any more questions? Now's the time to pose them in the chat or the Q&A. I have one more to actually bring up to you that I was inspired by. And I'm just curious about if you think about these ideas, which is, when you're photographing a space, we talk about landscape architecture, how it's designed to function and social uses. But I'm curious about the value of the image, right? We talk about that a lot in photography. And do you ever think about the idea about when a space can become valuable based off of its imageability, right? So when you actually have the view that's been designed, or it's valuable because it's heavily photographed, or just the relationship there. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
You mean where a space has become somehow iconic due to photographs, or well known due to photographs, and it has changed? Is that what you are implying? Or
right, or when something is obstructed because it's used to function to erase it, right, or to maintain unseen, right, as far as the different environments of a city, or yeah.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because I mean, I photograph mostly in Santiago, but the places are not easily identifiable as the city.
Right.
They're not like iconic places of the city, like, oh, it's there. And I think that has to do with the fact that I want to photograph things that can happen here, as well as in many other places, at least in South America or the cities where I have lived. So it's has to do with more like banal places,
right.
Or just like everyday places, everyday sidewalks and things like that.
Right, which is it's curious because a lot of our relationship to valuable places or places that are attractive to us are through the relationship of the image, right? You also use a lot of compositions that actually you don't use. I was going to say there's the absence of human figures in a lot of the compositions, and when you're referencing them, you're saying it in reference to scale. So that's also kind of curious to me, right? These ideas of like the larger than life or the mundane.
Yes, I mean, for example, in the book Panorama, it was important to include that.
Yeah.
Because in the way that is the narrative here, that it's our relation, and I'm photographing people, but not directly. It's more like the way we occupy this urban space. But in the end, it's still very much a portrait, right, of us, of how we inhabit.
No, absolutely. Okay, I mean, if there's any other thoughts or questions, you can pose them now, but we are a few minutes over 4 o'clock. So I think now is a good time to, oh, actually there's one more question in the Q&A. Last question here from Ellen. Oh, hi, Ellen. Oh, actually, she said not a question, but to say I thoroughly enjoyed seeing your photographs and your commentary. You're thoughtful and intelligent. Thank you. So that was more of a comment.
Thank you very much for your comments. It's a pleasure to share my work. It's always a challenge to show it online. There's technical things and I don't know, but thank you for the opportunity. For me, seriously, it's a pleasure.
It was so good having you with us, Sebastian. And we look forward to following more of your work moving forward. So thank you. And I hope everyone enjoys their Friday today. Happy Friday again. And we'll see you soon. Our next member event will be on July 10th. So stand by for the link to register for that. And otherwise, we will see you all soon.